Hello and welcome to Ranks FC, back on YouTube for 2023 new year, and plenty more content coming on the channel this year ahead. My name is Jack Collins and I'll be your host. Then I'm joined by the wonderful rank god, Mr. Sam Tai. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well indeed. Good to see you again. Only yesterday we did a podcast together. People could listen to that today, and now I get to see you on YouTube. Lucky me.
I know, and also only yesterday we started speaking about Enzo Fernandez, which is the top of that podcast. That was all about the fee, how much it was, whether it was kind of worth it. So we're not going to dig deep back into that today, but it is probably worth setting the table that reports suggest that Chelsea are willing to pay around 120 million euros to bring Enzo Fernandez to Stamford Bridge. It's a relatively eye-watering fee, but we did dig into why the reasons around that are and whether it's worth it or not yesterday. So today we're going to talk a little bit more generally about Enzo, right? We're going to use the 23 toolbox, our friends over at 23 Sport, to examine his game and see how he fits in at Chelsea and what the plan is for him.
Yeah, 100%. This is the sort of situation where the toolbox comes in real handy, right? Because we can visualize everything we're going to talk about. We can bring them up and show you guys as we talk through them. We can talk about his skills, his assets, his tendencies. We can show where on the pitch he does his damage, where on the pitch he's efficient, what you're really buying for 120 million euros. And maybe at the end, there might be a bit of room for some healthy criticism as well in terms of some weaknesses here and there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into it then, because there's a lot to get through. And let's start by bringing up this map of his progressive passes. I mean, Sam, do you want to walk us through it, what we're seeing here? And then we can kind of examine how that works in pertaining to Chelsea.
Yeah, so I mean, if I was to show you a map of just all of his passes for this season, it's just a solid red block, because he just passes the ball so frequently. He plays for a dominant team in Portugal, the best team in Portugal so far this season, Benfica, and he plays as a deep lying midfielder, and it's his responsibility to recycle possession and move the ball around, pick it up off the centre backs and move it forward. Like, he sees a lot of the ball. He's got an amazing ease in possession. You know, sometimes you see those players and they just look so at ease on the ball, so composed, so calm, so fluid, so difficult to dispossess. He's certainly one of those players. And in the modern game, we're starting to realize just how important those players are, moving the ball from one side of the pitch to the other. So I didn't show the entire pass map because it's not worthless, because it shows you how much he passes the ball, but you can't make head or tail of it because it's just arrows everywhere. So what I tried to do was isolate the progressive passes. So these are the passes that begin in his defensive third or in the middle third and end up in the final third. So this is him taking the ball from the first third or the middle third and pushing it into the final third. This is ball progression at its simplest form. And this is what Enzo does. And you can see from across the pitch, the width of it, flitting up and down, left or right, all through the centre. He's pretty busy and pretty good at this.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. And I suppose where this comes into it is that what we're seeing here is that Enzo is a wonderful progressor of the ball. And generally, I think we saw that at the World Cup. This is obviously a larger sample size in the Primera. We've seen him do this as well in the Champions League. So it's not just he's knocking these passes out against lower domestic opposition. He's been doing this in the big games in the Champions League as well, which is nothing to be sniffed at. The question, I suppose, remains, is this what Chelsea are looking for in their midfield? Because we're going to come on to kind of the all-round game. But for me, this is an element of a supposed Jorginho. And is that what this is? Is this a long-term Jorginho replacement, or is it something a little bit different?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't compare him to Jorginho in that I think he's a bit more physical and a bit more tenacious.
Those two things are not difficult to achieve.
No, not really. So I don't really want to, pour cold water on Jorginho's game, but I think we're all aware that he's pretty good at like one or two things. With Enzo, the passing is we're just kind of scratching the surface. But there are similarities in that both are very capable of seeing a lot of the ball, dictating the tempo of a game and pushing it through the line. So from one perspective, yeah, he is replicating a portion of Jorginho's game. We're obviously under the impression here that Chelsea may not have Jorginho for much longer, whether it's a sale or it's just the end of his contract. But there will be at least a little bit of their thinking here in terms of future-proofing their ability to progress the ball without him.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next slide, which is maybe an update, I suppose, from where we're going. And this is just those progresses into the final third. And perhaps this is maybe a first real point of differentiation, as you say, not the only point of differentiation, but this is a massive facet to his game that we've seen Chelsea fans complain about in Jorginho's game for years, that he only passes the ball around the box. Well, Enzo doesn't.
Yeah, that's where the difference lies. It's why the comparison only holds so much weight. So we take this on again. We've got progressive passes, fine. Now we've got progressive passes from deep and from the middle third into the final third, and the balls he's played into the box. So we're looking at them both combined. And you can see that this is a player who, bear in mind, this is off 14 Primera Liga starts, is really getting the ball forward and into dangerous areas very frequently. He gets the ball into the box very frequently. And this is only open play passes because he does take some set pieces. He's taken some corners, and the graph would look even busier if I hadn't taken those out. I just thought we'd look at the open play mechanics for this one because it's just a bit cleaner. And obviously it's much more of the game than set pieces. But yeah, getting that ball into the box, those stars and white lines are chances created and assists. So he's feeding the ball into dangerous areas and getting the ball into the box, not just pushing it to a winger and then kind of standing there and seeing what happens.
Yeah, I think this is it. There's a lot to like about this, but we saw this again. We're going to go back to a World Cup because it's the sample size that most people will have seen from Enzo over those 7 games. Aren't a particularly large sample size, sure, but they also highlighted some of his best qualities. But these have been on show throughout this season. I mean, we should probably mention at this point that we are still talking about 6 months of data here, not, years and years, not reams and reams, because he's only been in Europe for 6 months. And there's always going to be caveats to that in terms of how people view it. But generally, it's just been very, very impressive, hasn't it?
Yeah, and also you might be tempted to say, well, caveat, Benfica are a top dog. And, the bottom of the Primera Liga is pretty poor. So maybe he's getting, all these opportunities to push the ball around at ease because the likes of, I don't know, Portimonense or Aruca are not really up to scratch. And I guess you can probably make that argument. But when you take that in mind, you think, all right, well, where's he going? He's going to Chelsea. He's going to Graham Potter, a team that want to control possession and build play steadily. And these qualities that we're seeing from Enzo Fernandez will slot into Chelsea very, very easily. He's moving into a scenario where he can carry on doing what he's doing. So Chelsea are right to be looking at players that can do this. And they're probably right to say, well, it doesn't really matter about the level of opponent because we've just watched him do it for Argentina pretty damn successfully. We've watched him do it in the Champions League this season. Benfica topped their group. PSG were in their group and they topped it. And they were so good. So good. I don't think we have too many concerns here about the level of opposition. I think we know over the course of 6 months that Enzo can do this as long as he's in a possession-based system.
And he will be at Chelsea. Let's move on to his kind of creation stats because this one shows that he's putting things into relatively good positions, I think, Sam.
Yeah, so you've got a couple of corners in there. I didn't take the set pieces out because there's only a couple, so it doesn't clutter it too much. But this is really just keying in on those passes that we saw in the last graph, but really keying on the ones that go into the box or end in shots. So a shot assist is a pass that Enzo has made that has gone to somebody else, and off the back of that, someone has taken a shot. So again, it's just a further illustration, and I think a much better one, a much clearer one, of how he's pushing the ball into the box and creating shots for other people. You see the amount of them that are just inside the width of the goal and within the 18-yard box.
The Erling Haaland zone, as they call it.
The Haaland zone, yeah. I mean, this is a fair amount. This is 14 league starts, and he's pushing the ball into these scenarios for these shots. I like this map. I think it shows a player who is not like the most creative player in the world. He's not Martin Odegaard here, but he's playing a different role. From a deep lying position, from the base of a 4-2-3-1, he is managing to get this ball this far forward into the feet of his attackers this often. It's pretty strong.
Yeah, I think this is it. And a lot of these passes you can see are coming from relatively deep positions. And I think that's of note. Chelsea will have concerns and Chelsea fans will have concerns that there's literally nobody there to mop them up when these chances do arrive. But that's not the fault of a player here. And we're looking at, this varied kind of a selection of graphs here and lots of things to be excited about in terms of Enzo's game. And, we're only halfway through. And I think that's probably the interesting thing here. We're going to come off creation really after this and move into different elements of this game. But there's no doubt whatsoever that we're looking at a player here who is able to make things happen from deep and can be that spark. And right now, I think Chelsea feel like they need that spark. And maybe that's slightly less analytical than what we've been doing already. But it does feel like they just need someone to make things happen occasionally, just to get this team lifted. What is it, 6 of 7, or 1 in 7 wins for Graham Potter? They feel like they need something that's going to immediately make them more cohesive. And Enzo feels like the kind of all-rounder that can do that.
Yeah, I think the vibe I get from Chelsea at the moment is they lack authority in the middle of the pitch. That's probably the way I would put it. And you can sort of dress that up with different words if you want. They lack a midfield general, a commander. They lack a spine. They lack physicality. They lack intensity. Whatever it is, I think it all applies. And I think they lack authority in the middle. And that is where someone like Enzo, combining his ability on the ball, his cool and calm nature, his ability to progress it, his ability to recycle, I think that really comes in handy, because it's for Chelsea and for Potter, this is about gripping games, taking hold of them. And that's not something I'm seeing Chelsea do right now. Now, it's weird because 12 months ago, this is exactly what they were doing with Thomas Tuchel, as he was the master of control. Maybe the injuries in midfield have just been too much for them. Obviously, we know N'Golo Kante is a huge loss. But Chelsea finally have come round to your thinking, Jack. Well, if Kante is not going to be available for half the year, then we can't count on him. We need another solution.
We can't N'Golo count on him. No. Right. Let's move into a little bit of the differentiations in his game. And, we've spoke about him being an all-rounder a lot. This is the first kind of, demonstrations, I suppose, statistically, that he is one of these players that can make things happen in different areas of the pitch. We've looked at the creation. What are we looking at here, Sam?
This is my favourite one. And, ultimately, Jorginho is probably going to have a relatively similar pass map here. This is the passes that he has received in his own defensive third. And you look at how many are coming out from the goalkeeper. And you look at how many are coming inwards from the fullbacks as they pass back inwards as they're closed down. This is essentially a measurement of an ability of a player's security on the ball in that defensive third. All of these receptions are going to be pressured. All of these receptions are going to be on the half turn or going back, or goalkeeper coming out and sending it to Fernandez, and he's got his back to his marker and he has to wriggle out of it. Like, these are very difficult places to receive possession nowadays because of the amount of pressure that teams apply. And that's why really smooth ball progressing players are worth their weight in gold, or actually, as we've figured out on ranks, much more. Worth much more than their weight in gold. But this is what Christian Eriksen is doing for Man United and plugging a gap in the process. This is what we wanted to see from Matheus Nunes when he was linked to Man United and Liverpool over the course of the summer, and what he'll go and do for Wolves. This is what every big team wants. If you want 60% of the ball and you want to build out from the back, you need midfielders that can take the ball under pressure, under scrutiny, and recycle it nice and cleanly, wriggle out. Enzo does this.
But he also keeps it. And I think that's what's important in this next slide. What we're seeing here in terms of sequences, he's not someone who's receiving the ball under pressure and losing it immediately. He's a player who does make sure that the ball sticks and make sure that his teams can get around and make sure they can build up the pitch. And we're seeing that in this sequences thing.
I mean, you've got 4 Benfica players in the top 5 here of number of sequences.
Which says a lot, right?
That teams have recorded with 10 plus passes in. This is in the Primeira Liga. In 5th there, a Sporting player sneaks in. You've got top 4 here. Otamendi is top by 2. He's the centre-back. Enzo Fernandez is directly linking with him consistently as they build and control. So this is just another way of illustrating and measuring just how much command a game Enzo Fernandez has, on a game, because he's consistently involved, always there, always linking things, always building from the back, and he very, very rarely gives it away. I had a look at the statistics earlier, and he is dispossessed on average once per game. Given he is basically averaging, let's have a look here, 95 passes per game. He's only dispossessed once. This is not bad. This is extreme efficiency, but not for efficiency's sake, which is often what we talk about with Jorginho. This is extreme efficiency plus everything we've shown you with regard to getting the ball from the defensive third to the attacking third and into the box.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And this is it about keeping the ball, but making sure that it's going into sensible places and
Mm.
places where you can launch attacks from. And Chelsea have, I think, lacked that this season. That kind of dynamism in the middle is something that he definitely brings to the table. The other
Yeah.
thing that they've really lacked is physicality in the middle. And, there are going to be question marks over whether bringing a diminutive is not the right word because he's not diminutive, but he's not equally a physical powerhouse
No.
in the middle of the park. But he is someone who gets things done. And I think this one's interesting in terms of looking at what he brings to the table in those defensive phases.
Well, look, he plays next to Florentino Luis, an old school ranks favourite who is primarily a destroyer or a destructive player. He's exceptional at tackling and intercepting. So Enzo is never really going to be tasked with the primary defensive duty for this Benfica team, but he still does get involved. He does still get stuck in. Obviously, you can see from here that he plays on the left of the midfield too, because a lot of his actions are shaded towards the left-hand side of the pitch, 37 in each of those squares on the left, as opposed to 13 on the right. That just means Luis is picking up the slack on the other side. But this is a fair amount of defensive duels. Like, he definitely is active. He definitely gets stuck in. And we saw it again, World Cup, Argentina. Like, he gets stuck in. He gets involved. He is not a powerhouse, as you say. He's not someone that counts his tackles as the way he earns money, but he'll certainly get involved. And again, we go back to some stats. In the Primera Liga, 14 starts, 1,100 minutes. He averages 2 tackles a game and just under 1 interception, so 3 combined. It's not bad for a player whose primary skills are very clearly ball progression and ball handling.
Yeah, and this is it, and we talk about these all-rounders, and it's been a phrase that has permeated this entire discussion. But Chelsea do feel that, especially, when they drop into those 5 at the back formations and they look for a kind of flat midfield too, if you will, that they need their midfielders to kind of do a little bit of everything. And in that regard, he really does fit the bill here. The question marks will be how Chelsea are going to set up going forward, fine. But those question marks, I think, will be relatively put at ease by the fact that we've seen Enzo, even in the course of a very short World Cup month, play in a number of different systems and play them all very effectively.
Yeah, he was all over the place, wasn't he, for Argentina? His manager sent him onto the left, onto the right, through the middle, midfield diamond, midfield 3, midfield 2. He was doing everything, wasn't he? He and Alexis McAllister really interpreting their managers' like wildly varied instructions very, very well. I think you're right, it's a small sample size, but for him to play in so many different systems and roles over the course of those 7 games is mightily impressive. And it is very different to what we've seen with Benfica. Benfica have been super consistent in a 4-2-3-1, super consistent with an Enzo, Florentino Luis double pivot. Okay, they changed the attackers and the wingers because that's what you do, but he's had a very stable job in Portugal. What he did in Qatar was completely different, and you can't help but escape the feeling that he just passes every test you put in front of him.
Yeah. Continuously making things happen and continue making things happen in different areas. There are some questions that we're going to come on to at the end, but there is one more slide here that I want to look at, and it's his shot map. Now, Chelsea have scored the fewest goals in the top 10 of the Premier League right now by some distance, right? They're 7 behind Manchester United, who have 27, and they are the second lowest in the top 10. Only 8 teams have scored less than Chelsea this year. He's not coming in to be a goal machine, clearly, but he isn't someone afraid of taking a shot on either.
This is a terrible shot map. Like, this is really bad. I did say at the top that we were going to delve into some of his potential weaknesses as well, and like, I'd say just tacking on to the end of the defensive stuff. Like, I think he can get a bit carried away, a bit over aggressive at times. And I saw, friend of the pod, Zach Lowy, suggesting that or stating his concern that sometimes Enzo gets booked a little bit early because he's a bit overzealous, and then he has to be very careful, and there's a balance to be found. And I think there's a balance to be found with the shots that he takes as well. This is like Ruben Neves type awful. One of these
without the amount of stars. Ruben Neves' one it isn't great, but it has loads of stars dotted around it because he loves scoring from distance. That is not Enzo's vibe.
I mean, Neves is probably good for 2 or 3 from distance, but off like 60 or 70 shots or something. Enzo obviously isn't taking that volume, but clearly he's having very little impact from these situations. Again, you can see that he's obviously playing left centre mid because a lot of them are coming just off the left-hand side, right-footed drives. He has scored the one, which came inside the box. Take the hint, Enzo. inside the box. Maybe just some maturing to be done here. Although we obviously score an absolute banger at the World Cup against Mexico, right? It was the second goal. Beauty. And maybe some people have got the impression that Enzo is a consistent long-range threat. I would say that that's not the case. But obviously his technique and his ball striking mean that he can, and he might.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to be expected to necessarily get into these areas. The creative onus that we talked about at the top is where he's going to be asked to play. You'd imagine he's going to be a little bit deeper, being able to control the tempo, being able to play those passes from deep, being able to start Chelsea up on the right foot and make sure that they get into the right areas. This is not great, as you say. It's not particularly pretty, but it can make things happen. And I think this is interesting in that, obviously we've seen him change his game throughout the season a little bit, and then definitely throughout the World Cup in terms of adapting to his scenario and what's going on. It's not necessarily the worst complex, I suppose, to assume that he might be asked to get further forward at times, but more in a creative role than a goal scoring one.
Yeah, and I can't fault his effort. I can't fault his optimism. At least he gives it a go. Again, if you want to draw it back to Jorginho doesn't ever take these shots, and it's possibly because he's just simply not good enough and is more aware of his own limitations. But there is room for a healthy amount of this kind of thing from your central midfielders, especially in a situation like Chelsea's where they've struggled to get most of their forwards in form at any one time over the course of the last 12 months. Like, I can't fault the optimism. And when you saw, New Year's Day, Douglas Luiz takes a rubbish shot against Hugo Lloris from probably one of these areas. Lloris spills it straight into Ollie Watkins and the ball ends up in the back of the net. Like, that's not accounted for in this map. That's the sort of thing that can happen.
Yeah, definitely. That assists don't pop up here, because they're a strange thing to try and do. But equally, these things can cause chaos in the box. And to be honest, Chelsea feel like they could do with a little bit of that chaos at times. Let's just come back round to a couple of these comments and a couple of these questions. We got one from Jamie here who said, if you had to compare Enzo to a current Liverpool midfielder, what would be the closest match in terms of style? I know he's going to Chelsea. I just want to know if I'm right for wanting him. Jamie has also said he wished Liverpool signed him. He wants Bellingham, Fernandez, and Amrabat. Nothing much then. I said this on the pod yesterday, but it was like, our demands most moderate. Oh, we only want the world. But I think it's interesting in terms of, can we find some comparisons for Enzo?
Do they have one similar? I'm struggling to pick one out.
Even if it's not a Liverpool midfielder, I know you've said this, the question points, but I think some stylistic comparisons might be of use.
Well, I mean, again, I thought I mentioned him right at the top, but the way Matheus Nunes dribbles out of pressure and wriggles away from people and then starts to carry the ball, I think they're very similar. I know that Nunes hasn't really he's not been on fire for Wolves this season, but he would have been the cheaper option here. There's actually suggestions today, Jack, I don't know if you've seen, that he's going to go to Liverpool next year. So they might actually be looking at that and thinking, oh, let's go and get one of those. Who's left? But Matheus is probably the closest example I would draw that I can think of. Apart from maybe Tchouaméni does a fair amount of this, to be fair. He's actually very underrated in this area.
Yeah, I think that's an okay.
He also shoots badly from distance.
I mean, what the other kind of question is, I suppose, where does he sit in this Chelsea rotation? And actually, is there a little bit of Mateo Kovacic about him? Now, he's not quite as much of a ball carrier, I don't think, in terms of what he does. But actually, when you look at what he's got brought to the table, Mateo Kovacic is not a good goal scorer, despite the fact he occasionally scores a worldie. He's able to penetrate a little bit deeper. He is able to carry the ball. I think that there's a little bit here where you're looking at maybe an upgrade on Kovacic as opposed to anything else, even if Enzo likes to pick up the ball in a little bit of a deeper area to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, Kovacic's skill set is so heavily weighted towards dribbling. That I'd be wary of that. Although you're right, and it does tick a few boxes. I'd rather compare Enzo to Frenkie, and just say that Enzo has slightly less dynamism in terms of going on those lung busting runs. But in terms of tempo control, ball security, ability to operate the base in midfield, touch and feel for the ball, and then the odd goal, I'd say he's closer to Frenkie than he is to Kovacic.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's go on to Paul's question. He says, Yo, Sam and Jack, do you think there'd be much difference in value between now and the summer? Or are Chelsea too eager / afraid to wait, i.e. they need him now or afraid someone else will make a bid? I saw a lot of reports about this, Paul, in terms of Liverpool and Manchester United both appeared to be in the conversation for Enzo Fernandez, but unable to make any sort of move until the summer. So I do think that there is maybe that thing hanging over them where Chelsea are like, well, if we get it done now, then we don't have to worry about those things. I can't see there being all that much difference of valuation. Yes, the January inflates it a little bit, but he has a release clause. So, I don't think Benfica are going to sell for much less than that anyway, because they know that the interest's already been there.
Well, they don't tend to buckle, do they, Benfica? They tend to stick to their guns. And if they do sell for less than the release clause, then it may only be for a little bit less. So if the release clause is 120 million euros, I'd say the absolute cheapest you're getting Enzo for is 100 million euros, no matter where you are in the calendar, which is going to be about 90 million quid. So maybe Chelsea are charging themselves an extra 15 million as a premium. But Chelsea right now are not destined for the Champions League. And if they're not in the Champions League and Enzo is still at Benfica when it comes to June, who do you think, when they all come to the table, Enzo's going to pick? Who's bottom of the list? Well, the team in the Europa League probably are bottom of the list, sadly. So this is just what you have to do to go out and find your guys and sign your guys before anybody else. It's probably not that different to a couple of deals we've seen recently where, Chelsea have gone and agreed a deal for Nkunku for more than his release clause, but so that they can kind of get it sorted nice and early and then get it done in installments. It's kind of like the new art of the deal.
Yeah, it's changing every time. Doug says late to join, but does Enzo for 100 million plus mean Nahuel Molina is worth at least 50 million? Benfica killing it. I'm going to say no, Doug. I hate to disappoint you, but I'm going to suggest that Nahuel Molina is not going to be sold for 50 million pounds to anybody. No. And if he was, then someone is paying a lot of money too much for Nahuel Molina.
He's a good player. We like him. I think I spotlighted him at one point last season, didn't I, when he was at Udinese? And he's a good player. Like, joined Atletico in the summer for, what was it, like 18 million or something like that? I don't think, let's keep him there for a little bit. He had a good World Cup, but there were still a couple of moments where he miscontrolled balls and you're like, what are you doing?
He's also quite a position niche player, isn't he? He feels like he can really only play as a wing back. I know there are moments he plays as a fullback. He's got a head loss in him, doesn't he, Molina? I like him as well, but I don't think you're going to be spending 50 million on a fullback unless they're right at the top of the game anyway. So
just imagine that the list of fullbacks that have gone for 50 million is like Kyle Walker, Ferland Mendy. If you're adding Nahuel Molina to that, then you have committed a crime against transfer history.
Absolutely. Right, last question. This is from Yakash. He says, hey guys, what would be the best midfielder to pair with Enzo between current Chelsea midfielders and potential other midfielders Chelsea could sign? And I thought this was a good question because much as we really like Enzo and much as we just talked about lots of his strengths and why he does actually fit at Chelsea, this doesn't feel like the last piece of the puzzle. It feels like Chelsea need one more. And we joked about this on the podcast yesterday that they could do a whole lot worse than actually just signing Florentino Luis as well. Just to give them that cover in the defensive phases. But where would you put him in terms of with this current Chelsea crop, Sam? And if they are going to sign a player to complement him that isn't Florentino Luis, what kind of profile should Chelsea be looking at?
Well, I like the dynamic that him and Florentino Luis have for sure. And I'd be looking at that style of player that Luis is and trying to work and riff off that. And obviously, we come back first and foremost to N'Golo Kante. Like, if he's fit, if he can play, then he and Enzo, I think they fit really nicely together. And I think they're absolutely amazing. If you can't get Kante fit, what about Gladbach's Manu Kone as a partner who would be very Florentino Luis in lots of different ways? The explosivity, the box-to-box nature, the athleticism, the way he hunts down the ball, the energy, the sheer energy he can bring, and the brawn too. Like, I do like that as an option. If they wanted to go absolutely mad, then Jude Bellingham is still on the table here. Jude Bellingham or Declan Rice are still on the table here as complementary pieces, I think, to Enzo.
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting to see how he plays alongside Dennis Zakaria. Obviously, we haven't seen very much of Zakaria. We've seen the fleeting glimpses at the end just before the World Cup. But as he comes back through, that feels like the most natural fit for me in terms of balancing the side if Kante is injured. So
I agree.
That's one for me. That's one for me. But it's going to be interesting. Mo says, why can't they go for Declan Rice? I'd imagine that the answer to that question is similar in terms of what Sam's just said, is that I don't think Rice will go anywhere till the summer. And it doesn't feel like these two pieces are completely non-complementary. Like if Declan Rice was to sign, you could play him alongside Enzo Fernandez, and there would be no problems with that whatsoever, I don't think. So if they do decide to go back in for if they do go back in for big money in the summer, which has been touted for so long, then there's no reason that this would rule that deal out, I don't think.
You're not getting Declan Rice this January. Look at the Premier League table. Look at it, and then it's just not going to happen. Like they're just not going to sell him right now. Whether or not they like it or not, and whether they'll admit it or not, West Ham are on the cusp of a relegation battle, and they are not going to sell their best player in the middle of that. No way. Summer, maybe. Let's have a look. And I would love to see that. I think Enzo and Declan Rice would be an amazing partnership, genuinely, but it's one that will have to wait at least 6 months.
Indeed. Right, on that, we are going to call this a day. Thank you so much to everybody for watching. Thank you for your comments as well and your questions. Thank you so much to Mr. Sam Ty, Rank God.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. We are back, as we said at the top, for a new year, and we'll be back on the channel very shortly. We've got a really special documentary to bring you later in the month as well. We're really looking forward to releasing, so keep an eye out for that. We'll see you before then, though. Take it easy, gang. Peace.